Now, with just 2 years to go until Nigeria's next general election, a new national survey is challenging some long-held assumptions about voter apathy and raising fresh alarms about trust, fear, and legitimacy. Findings from YIAGA Africa's latest National Voting Intentions Survey suggest that most Nigerians still want to vote in 2027. 77% say they are likely to cast a ballot. But beneath that headline lies a more troubling picture: fear of violence, weak trust in institutions, and deep regional divides that could yet suppress turnout. More than 4 in 10 respondents cite insecurity as their biggest barrier to participation. Fewer than half say they trust the Electoral Commission, INEC, to deliver a credible election. And while many Nigerians believe their vote matters, confidence in the system remains fragile, especially in parts of the South. So, as the countdown to 2027 begins, the question is no longer whether Nigerians will vote. It is whether the state, political parties, and electoral institutions can create the conditions that allow them to vote safely, confidently, and in numbers that give the result real legitimacy. Well, for more on this, I'm joined now from our studios in Lagos by Samson Itodo, Executive Director of YIAGA Africa, a civil society group dedicated to the promotion of democratic governance and the group that conducted that far-reaching survey. Thank you very much indeed, Samson, for joining us. Good to see you again, and I should wish you a happy new year, although we're almost at the end of January, but we haven't seen this year. Your survey says...
That's right.
Indeed.
Happy New Year.
Happy New Year to you. Your survey says that 77% of Nigerians still want to vote. I mean, after so many years of low turnout, that is striking. So what's keeping them from the ballot box? Is it apathy or is it fear?
Well, thanks, Charles. I think that before I respond to that question, perhaps to just set a background on why YIAGA Africa, working with NOI polls, conducted this survey. Following the 2023 elections, it was clear that citizens' trust in the electoral process had reached its lowest ebb. Successive elections like the Itodo, Ondo, and also by-elections didn't inspire any confidence. And so we wanted to ask citizens whether they were interested in voting in the light of this, so whether it's perceived distrust in the electoral process. And that was why we conducted this national survey. And the citizens have said that they are interested in voting because this survey, which will run in series, is a national voter intention survey. We wanted to check whether citizens were intending or interested in voting. And like you said, 77% of the respondents did indicate that they're interested in voting. However, issues around insecurity and violence are a major threat. And so 42% of that 77% have said that the issues relating to insecurity could prevent them from voting. And that is really scary, that even though on one part there is intention to vote, it doesn't mean that it would reflect actual turnout on the day of election. There are several factors, and that's insecurity. They've also talked about issues around INEC logistics and trust in the system. When you look at the distribution across the country, and where do you see high voting intention? The Northwest and the Northeast are the two zones that show high voting intention compared to places like the South and the Southeast. When you triangulate the data, you discover that in regions where there is low interest to vote, it's as a result of distrust, either in the election management body or negative electoral experiences of voters in those regions.
Very interesting indeed. And I'm really glad you did that survey because it really gives us a very objective glimpse and assessment of what is actually going on with voter intentions in this country. Now, let's just take them bit by bit, because more than 4 in 10 respondents say fear of violence could stop them from voting. Does that mean Nigeria is already losing the battle for election day security? Because, I mean, if voters don't feel safe, can we honestly describe any election as free and fair, no matter the results?
Well, it's a major source of concern because, as we indicated in the report, that these findings don't project a security democracy paradox. And what does that mean? That on one part you see citizens who want to exercise their democratic rights to vote, but they are concerned about whether that right will be protected or it won't be suppressed under the guise of curbing or addressing insecurity. Because yes, there's insecurity in the land. And one of the concerns being expressed is if the state, in a bid to address, insecurity, may likely encroach on voting rights. And so citizens are saying that this is a big issue and that the state needs to respond. And the public presentation of that report yesterday, the police did assure voters and assure Nigerians that they will provide all the necessary security. They will address some of the pre-election insecurity issues. But quite frankly, if this insecurity worsens, then we're going to see lower turnout in the general election. And that's what this survey is saying. And it's calling on state institutions, especially our security agencies, including political actors that heat up the polity, that they need to think deeply about democratic legitimacy. And that if voters don't show up, to cast their vote in a safe and secure manner, then you cannot say the outcome of that election enjoys legitimacy from the people.
Indeed, and of course, the police, every election cycle, they say the same thing, that they're going to, they assure the public of protection and so on and so forth, but there are always sort of big gaps as far as security is concerned. Well, let's look at another aspect of your survey, Samson. Less than half of Nigerians say they trust INEC. How serious is that trust deficit, and how dangerous is it this close to 2027?
It's very dangerous. It is clear from the survey that more than half of Nigerians don't trust INEC. And they don't trust INEC for several reasons. One, it's the way and manner and their experience with previous elections. A situation where you have conflicting results emanating from the same polling units during elections. A situation where, polling officials subvert the will of the people. Or a situation where we see pre-filled result sheets, on the day of elections. Does not inspire confidence, on the voters. And so, we are not surprised that this level of distrust does exist because of the experiences, of voters. It's not just INEC, it's also the conduct of the other actors within the election value chain, the security agencies, the judiciary. All of these actors, their conduct, inactions or mismanagement of the electoral process has adverse effect on the way citizens perceive, elections. So yes, this level of distrust is there. You can feel it, on the part of citizens. And this is why the current chair, of INEC, has vocalized the fact that INEC needs to do a better job of inspiring trust and confidence in Nigerians. And I think that how the commission, manages issues around logistics, how it manages results collation and transmission, how it manages political party registration. Very soon the primaries will begin. How INEC manages, this nomination process. The primaries and the congresses it observes or monitors. The list of candidates that it accepts from political parties. In situation where INEC accepts list of candidates from political parties when validly conducted primaries have not held, would really cast a blight, on the integrity of the commission. And these are landmines that we hope that the current INEC chairman and the officials at INEC would take seriously. And I love the fact that, yes, the chairman, has consistently, since his assumption of office, talked about the need to inspire trust and confidence. And we see it as an opportunity, but we've got to keep a close eye, because when you think about turnout at elections declining, you also need to think about how the actors are managing, the electoral process, because it does impact on the levels of turnout. No trust in the electoral process, do not expect any high turnout in the next elections.
Absolutely. I couldn't have said it better myself. Now, your data also shows particularly low confidence in the southeast and south-south. I mean, is Nigeria heading into a sort of regionally fragmented election where some parts of the country hardly believe in the process at all? I mean, if those regions disengage, what does that do to national legitimacy?
Absolutely. I'm particularly not surprised with the data, and thanks to NOI polls for this rigorous work that they did. Now, in the 2023 elections, when you check the deployment of election materials across the entire country, there were 2 regions that experienced higher delays in the deployment of materials and commencement of elections. Those 2 regions are South-South and Southeast. When other regions were recording 30-20% commencement in the presidential elections in 2023, Southeast and South-South were somewhere around 11 and 15%. Very, very low. What that tells us is that perhaps there was some systematic, and intentional effort to delay, the deployment of material so election commences late in those particular locations. And so when you see, voters or respondents from the South-South and the Southeast express this kinds of negative sentiments, it cannot be divorced from the experiences that they've had in previous elections. This is why we have said, if INEC is going to build confidence on the part of voters, it needs to pay close attention to the South-South and the Southwest because of these levels of distrust. Because if we're not careful, any outcome of elections from those regions will not enjoy any form of legitimacy or credibility. And so when we think about confidence building, we need to focus attention on the South-South and the Southeast and give these regions a sense of belonging, that their voices and their vote does count, and because they are part of this nation state called Nigeria. And it's the same thing, around, when you think about the voter registration. If you look at the data, the current CVR data, you also see, the levels of registration, in these regions compared to the other regions. Some have argued that there may be other factors responsible for this, but what this data has shown, because of the representativeness, is that we've got to pay a close attention to the Southeast and the South-South. We have to invest in building confidence, in that particular region, so you can encourage more people, to show up in subsequent elections.
Indeed, and just looking at the data from your survey, I wonder if the quality of political leadership being offered also came up in that survey. Because, I mean, we read that many Nigerians say better security will help, but did they also talk about credible candidates, making it likely that, it'll boost turnout?
There were 2 questions on that we asked citizens. The first one is, what would influence your voting choices? And 21% said the quality of candidates. In fact, the first was insecurity, and the second is the quality of candidates. When we asked about factors that would inspire higher turnout, they said more credible candidates. It is clear from this survey that Nigerian voters vote not just for political parties, but for candidates. So they are paying close attention to the quality of candidates that political parties present. And so parties need to take this seriously, because if you don't have candidates with competence, with character and capacity on the ballot for 2027, it's not going to inspire voters, to show up at elections. So they are quite concerned. And so two things. Parties need to ensure that the primaries for the 2027 elections need to be transparent, they need to be credible, and they need to be accountable. This entire obscene commercialization, of the candidate nomination process needs to be a relic of the past, because voters are looking up to parties to present candidates that are credible. And if they are not credible, if they don't have what it takes to lead, voters are not going to show up. And so we hope that this will translate into issue-based, politics ahead of the next election. But Charles, this is just the first round of the survey. We're going to be conducting this quarterly. So we hope that by the next quarter, when the second report comes, we may see some shifts. But I think one thing that this tells us is that voters are concerned and they are paying attention to the quality of candidates that will be nominated by political parties. Any serious political party that cares about electoral victory and it's not preparing to buy votes in the next election should take this finding seriously and ensure their candidate nomination process is devoid of any form of manipulation.
And we noticed, Samson, that many Nigerians are not even aware of recent electoral reforms. I mean, we know YIAGA Africa has worked very closely with the National Assembly, INEC, and so on to try and make sure that electoral reforms are put on the front burner. I mean, the fact that only a minority are aware of this, is this a communication failure by INEC or a deliberate silence by political actors who benefit from confusion? Because, I mean, who gains when voters don't understand the rules of the game?
I think it's a constellation of factors. Again, we're not surprised that over 70%, of respondents indicate that they are not aware of the reforms, despite efforts, by different stakeholders to popularize some of those reforms. In fact, when you look at the current reform process, and the question is how many Nigerians are aware of the proposals in the current electoral bill? Just a few. We in civil society are doing our bit to communicate to voters to say there's electronic transmission in this current bill. Perhaps that accounts for why there's reluctance, to pass this. We're hoping that when the Senate resumes next week, Tuesday, it prioritizes this, concludes this process within 2 weeks so that the president can assent to this bill. So there is legal certainty for the 2027 elections. As long as they continue to delay, INEC would not have the clarity that it requires, to begin to organize the next election, because the commission needs to issue timetable by the 20th, of February. And the National Assembly also needs to be more open. I give it to the House of Reps. They've communicated effectively some of the proposals, but we can't say the same for the Senate. And so the National Assembly has a responsibility to continue to popularize, this bill. The question is, in the National Assembly's website, do they have this bill uploaded on the site, on their social media platforms? And do they have provisions of this bill? Are the spokespersons, of the National Assembly constantly engaging citizens and the public about this provision? Electoral reform is not the responsibility of civil society alone or even the media. The citizens need to be very involved in this. And so the clarion call here is we are now at this particular point. The train has left the station. We're just waiting for the Senate to pass its own version of the bill, transmit to the president. And Charles, if the same National Assembly can consider the national anthem bill in a couple of hours, I see no reason why the entire electoral amendment process will not be concluded within a span of 2 weeks to provide the clarity that Nigerians need. And Nigerians have said, we want electronic transmission of results. It is there in the bill. Any attempt to not consider and conclude this process will be interpreted as a deliberate effort by the key actors to prevent electoral transparency in the 2027 elections?
And of course, as you said, I mean, the question is how much damage this delay is already doing to preparations for 2027, whether Nigeria is running out of time to fix this, and whether that window has already started to close. But beyond that, and looking overall, if nothing changes and security remains shaky and trust stays low, what's the real risk in 2027? Low turnout, disputed results, or a deeper legitimacy crisis?
I think it's all the factors that scenarios that you've painted. First, the competitive nature of our elections needs to be guaranteed if we care about legitimacy. The reason why it's called elections, it's a competition, it's a contestation, healthy in every respect. And so we must not take out the competitive component of our electoral process. That's one. Two, if voters don't show up and we have the minority determining for the majority, you cannot say that is a democracy. You cannot say that there is legitimacy. It's not a reflection, of the will, the majority will of our people. But then, as voters, we also have a responsibility to show up, because staying away, it's not sufficient. We give unpopular actors, the opportunity to manipulate elections when we don't show up. Whilst we say that, yes, it limits legitimacy when voters don't show up, voters also know that they have a responsibility, especially when the security agencies have assured that there will be some form of security. I think the other point is the role of the institutions, especially our agencies of protection. I think it will be indictment on our security agencies if they don't guarantee security of the voters. Then they'll be failing in their responsibility. And I would like to give them the benefit of doubt that they have the capability, to protect every voter and everyone involved in election, because they've done that in previous elections. And in doing so, they must also recognize that fidelity is to the Constitution of Nigeria, and it's not fidelity to the powers that be. When they swear an oath, they swear an oath to protect Nigeria and its citizens. And so they shouldn't limit protection for a certain class of people. It should be for every Nigerian, because the security and welfare of Nigerians is the primary purpose of government. That's the whole essence of a social contract, that in elections, when people vest responsibility into certain individuals to hold power in trust for them, what citizens get in return is security and their welfare. And so the state cannot fail in that responsibility, especially when we're going into an election when it is clear that citizens are worried about security and their protection, for the elections. But this survey has shown that there is interest, but that interest may be undermined if security is not guaranteed for the next elections.
Samson, I want to thank you very much indeed, and to congratulate you once again for the work that you're doing, and also for this survey that's revealed a lot about the way people are thinking going into 2027. Samson Itodo is Executive Director of YIAGA Africa, a civil society group dedicated to the promotion of democratic governance, and the group that conducted that survey, and he was talking to me from our studios in Lagos.